I'm too nostalgic, I'll admit it.
We graduated 4 months ago. What can you possibly be nostalgic for?
I'm nostalgic for conversations I had yesterday. I've begun reminiscing events before they even occur. I'm reminiscing this right now. I can't go to the bar because I've already looked back in it in my memory, and I didn't have a good time.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. It's time to get the gang back together and talk about some old comic books. I believe this is, well, it's the second time. We did a Contract with God, which is definitely a graphic novel, but this is the first time we were doing a Marvel graphic novel. We're going to be talking about The Death of Captain Marvel by Jim Starlin, released in 1982. And here to talk with me about this is comic book superfan, the man so cool they called the breed, Eric Breen. How you doing?
I'm doing all right.
All right, so Joe and I were supposed to review this, and then you got mad at us, and you said, how could you do this without me? You better have liked this.
I'm a diva.
Obviously, the other member of the team is award-winning comic book editor, writer, Joe Corallo. How you doing, Joe?
I'm all right, Wes. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. This was a great read. I've heard about this book. I've read parts of the stories because it does a pretty good job encapsulating a good portion of Captain Marvel's time at Marvel Comics as we get obviously to the death of Captain Marvel, as is indicated by the title of the story and the cover. This is great stuff by Jim Starlin. He's certainly when you think of Marvel Comics and Jim Starlin, you think of the Cosmos, Joe, even though he's had such a wonderful career, thinking of some of the stuff he did with Batman. But has anyone ever gotten Marvel's cosmic universe better than Jim Starlin?
Jeez. Marv, I guess you could argue Stan and Jack on Fantastic Four. But other than that, I'd say Jim, who also is really underrated as a writer-artist, I think in part because of people at this particular moment in history when something like this comes out. You have people like Frank Miller, John Byrne, and all that out there. So, kind of sucking the oxygen out of that particular room. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a gorgeous book, and Jim really knocks it out of the park.
You can see like Dan Abnett and Al Ewing and some other writers that you see are kind of more into the cosmic realms. We're definitely influenced by all of Jim Starlin's work, and definitely this. Yeah, there's definitely it's crazy how good this thing is, Braid. So is this this was Marvel Comics graphic novel line? They did a lot of really crazy important things in these back in the day. You got the introduction, I believe, of was it the X-Force or
New Mutants?
New Mutants. We got God Loves Man Kills. We've got the Death of Captain Marvel. They used to pack these things with really, really important stories that are high quality. Were these things, as a younger man when you were early on in your comic reading lifespan, were these things that you were really jazzed about, or were you upset that they weren't in your regular comic book format?
Not even a little bit. This, like I said, this was the first Marvel graphic novel in the series, and the direct market had been flourishing for a few years. By then, comic book shops were popping up everywhere, so it was a natural extension of the hobby, and these were event books. And as you stated, originally most of the graphic novels packed some serious weight. They eventually settled into just stories that didn't really fit everywhere else. There would be Avengers, Black Widow, Daredevil stories that you not sure where they all fit, but yeah, this definitely, I remember when this came out, this was like a wow moment. Yeah, this is really something.
I'm kind of disappointed they didn't keep with this, Joe, because there are a lot of things that are produced both by DC, Marvel, and some of the other publishers. They're released as miniseries, as like 5 or 6 issues, but it's like one story. There's not like real stopping points. Like this thing should be out as a graphic novel on day one, because that's how it's meant to be read.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you read something like this, and I think you can follow that like through line from, people like Denny O'Neil, Len Wein in the 70s, Jerry Conway, and then you get here, And it's like even that next step further of these sort of comics that are for an older audience, comics that can be appreciated by adults. And, you know, we're talking, this is a full 4 or so years before you have your Watchmens and your, you know, Dark Knight Returns and all that. And I don't think you get that kind of stuff without the death of Captain Marvel, without Frank Miller's Daredevil and all of that. So it's interesting seeing, you know, something like this, putting that in the perspective. You could make the argument that that was just Frank Miller evolving over time from his Daredevil run into what he did with, you know, Batman. But here, Jim really never gets talked about in that sort of, you know, playing field, but he really did have a big impact in that. And I think this story is a big impact in getting comics to that point.
Absolutely. And then Eric, you know, I think the format gives the creator more, I don't know, opportunities to execute the story in a different manner, you know, gives them more freedom. But the way this is constructed, I really like it. He's essentially, he's doing like, he's got a diary, you know, we'd call it a vlog right now, or maybe an audio blog, where he's, you know, talking about his life story, and you hear a chapter, a little, you know, few pages, and then he meets somebody, and you get to kind of get, you know, some amplifying information currently about what ends up coming out of that little chapter he gives, and then you move on to the next one. I really like the format that Jim Starlin uses to tell the story, to really, you know, give the story of Captain Marvel, but how all of these things are really affecting the character, you know, in the moment.
Yeah, you know, this, at the time that this was done, his own book had been gone for about 3 years. They, you know, didn't really have any plans for him going forward. So this was going to be the grand send off to a character who basically, I guess you say, they didn't really have any future plans for. But the way they did this, it was one of those, if you read this and you go, man, if they've been doing something like this all along, there'd still be a Captain Marvel. And so it was a great final story. But yeah, it's, as we'll get into, everything in this story, like you're filling in the pieces of his history, and you know, and then the reveal of what happened. Well, obviously, you know, something bad happens by the title, but
Yes.
the way, you know, he's just basically chronicling his life because he knows it's about to end. And so I said that's, you know, really powerful opening to this book.
Mm.
Absolutely. It's I've heard from more than one grown man, Joe, that when they read this in their younger days, that a tear was brought to their eye. I believe this one, and the other story that comes up a lot is the death of Gwen Stacy, where there was really an emotional impact of the story.
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the better moments for that earlier in the book, because obviously by the time we get, you know, towards the end, there's more need for that. But I forget exactly which page, but there's the silent page where, you know, he's
telling Elysius,
about what's going on, and that's a really impactful page, and it's made impactful because Jim Starlin is not shy to use his words through the story. So the fact that you get an entire page that's completely silent, where he's able to you know, show it all without telling, it is remarkable. And I don't know how much of that had to do with Al Milgram's input as the editor, or if Jim decided that on his own. It's very possible Jim may have tried to write something for that page and was like, you know what, nothing's going to work better than just laying it out like this. But whoever was behind that decision, it's easily one of the best pages in the entire book.
Oh, absolutely. So let's kind of get in here. Obviously, this is formatted a little bit differently. We'll go through the best we can and kind of cover the story as it goes through along. And the art is fantastic, as you would imagine Jim Starlin, Cosmic Universe in Marvel art to be. But essentially, you find out early on, Breen, that he's telling a story. Like I said, you know something's wrong. Obviously, not only by the title, but he's got this. He's chronicling his life and his adventures. He's talking about breaking free from the Kree. Originally, he was sent to Earth as like the field agent, and they were going to, eventually enslave the planet. He grew to love humans and seeing their potential. He and his, I believe it's his lover, Una, decide that that's not what they should do. He ends up taking on the moniker of Captain Marvel, because he was Captain Mar-Vell of the Kree Empire. Really good opening story and kind of gets you introduced to the character and how he arrived on Earth.
Yeah, and in just a handful of pages, they basically went over the first 20-something issues of his own title, going back to Marvel Superheroes, because he was sent there as an advanced scout because the Kree had every intention of enslaving the Earth. The only person he could come around to his way of thinking was Una. Problem was there was that Jan Rog character who was not only in love with Una, but had every intention of following through on the Kree's mission. So that which inadvertently got her killed and led to him basically changing. I mean, he was already planning on betraying the Kree, which he did. And then along the way, I believe it was the Supreme Intelligence gave him cosmic awareness. Which factors into how he knows what is happening to him now. And it was just a really good way to basically catch the readers up on what they'd missed had they not been a regular reader of the Captain Marvel series.
And this kind of gets interrupted as he's talking about his life story gets interrupted. I believe it's by the mentor and by Eros, the father and brother of Thanos. And it turns out they're going to a distant place, wherever they parked Thanos' control ship. I think it's out past Pluto. They're going to go visit it because they want to return Thanos' body, which has been turned into stone, back to the Jupiter sun. Oh my goodness, how I forgot the name of it. It's Titan.
Yes.
To return him back to Titan to the royal wherever they're going to bury him. Mm-hmm. So they're going on there, and we start getting introduced and reminded of his battles with Thanos. We get a lot of information about Adam Warlock, and when they find the statue, it looks like somebody. There's potentially an altar there, and we get a nice, good scrape, and then we get some confirmations about there's something definitely wrong with him, because while they do kick all these guys' asses, Joe, he is winded, and he is not in good spirits at the end of it. And obviously the mentor and Eros immediately just see there is something wrong with this man.
Yeah, and it starts with that kind of like, I'm out of practice, and then it leads to the coughing and him falling to his knees and it really becoming a problem. But we get some good action before we get to that point. And one of the other things I love about this, I love about like retro science fiction in general, is like, it opens up with, like the first page, it's Captain Marvel with he's got like, little like microphone that's like corded to like the computer. It's got a console.
Cassette tape. That was my favorite part. Because I got this cassette tape for the Avengers. It's like, man.
I love that stuff because there's something so. There's something so like quaint, I guess, about it. But I love all that kind of stuff, like that. The first Alien movie where it's a ship going through space that's running on like DOS, but so you just get that like charm to it that I think really elevates it. But and also a lot of credit to Steve Olive, I think is the colorist, and Jim Novak, the letterer. The colors in this, and I feel like a lot of the Marvel graphic novels, it feels prestige. It feels a little next level, throughout.
I love the effect that you get on Captain Marvel's face when he's using like his little, his version of a Spidey sense, where he kind of turns into space itself and you can see the stars.
Yes, no, that's gorgeous. That whole page, where it's those like 4 panels and it's like close up, and he's, it starts with the one star on his forehead, and then the next panel he's just got stars all over, and
that's something that longtime readers will remember, because that was that was used a lot in the series itself. But I do want to point out, I said the for anybody that's wondering how Thanos got in that position, go back and read the Avengers Annual 7 that's continued in Marvel 2-in-1 Annual 2, also written by Jim Starlin. I'm still on record as saying that is not only the best Warlock story, it's also the best Thanos story.
And that's where Adam Warlock, he doesn't make it, right?
No, he does not.
Yeah. That's where we see the demise of Adam Warlock.
But, oh my God, is that a great story.
Yeah.
All right. We might have to put that one on for another retrospective here in a while when we come back to some Cosmos.
Yeah.
After this stuff, Joe, we start learning about his time with Rick Jones, where he was essentially cast out, I think it's by the Supreme Intelligence, into like the negative zone where he's like frozen there. But then Rick Jones gets a hold of his bracelets. He bangs them together and they switch places. And you got like Rick Jones and Captain Marvel almost having like a Thor experience where when you put the staff down, he becomes Thor kind of thing. And they got a bunch of adventures there. So those two characters are very, very close. You find out the history there. Yeah. And then he finally tells Rick Jones what's happened and that he has cancer. He's been diagnosed. They're trying to treat it. But, obviously he's Kree. He can't talk to the Kree because he's been outcast. Yeah. He's not a human. So the human doctors that are working on it can't help him as much. And he's not, he's not a Titan either. So the Titan doctors that are trying to help him, it's not looking great. And he's wanting to kind of say goodbye to Rick. And he is not having any of it. He is in complete denial.
Yeah, no, Rick's very upset about this. I mean, Rick has a thing for captains in general. But, but even beyond that, this is where, when we're talking earlier about like, this is like, sort of elevating the media and this is more of an like adult story. I mean, at the time, if you're like an 8, 9, 10-year-old and you're trying to explain to your parents like, oh, this comic's great. Captain Marvel's explaining to Rick Jones he's going to die of cancer. They'd be like, what are you, that's a comic book? Give me that. Let me see what are you talking about? That's, it's really, it does really elevate things. And that particular bit does really stand out. Rick Jones in general is just such an interesting character who kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And we've talked about this before, even in other retrospectives. If you're not familiar with the Silver and most of like the Bronze Age of Marvel, you probably see a character like Rick Jones and you're like, who the hell, like, why do people care about this guy? Like, he's this like minor character that, is kind of off to the side, or he's just associated with the Hulk, but he was really, such an important linchpin to the Marvel universe as, the audience perspective kind of character. So, you could read into that as well as you're the audience and you don't want to hear that Captain Marvel's dying. You're upset too.
Also, Breen, at some point, he's talking and they're like, listen, Rick Jones was an orphan. He was initially with Hulk. That didn't work out. Then he was with Captain America. That didn't work out. You two were bonded for such a long time. It's like losing his family. You might have been the only family he really thought he had. Really made it even that much more impactful. At
the time it was. We found out later he had a mom out there later that Peter David introduced. But yeah, for a little context, Rick Jones first hooked up with Captain Marvel, and I believe this was during the early issues of Captain Marvel, like 17 or so. But what was going on in Captain America was the Red Skull had the cosmic cube, and he had taken over Captain America's body. And he was in it when Rick Jones was his partner. He'd been training to be his Bucky. He runs into him in an alley, and Cap just belts him away. So he feels like he didn't know that was the Skull. He thought that Captain America just had enough of him. So he hooks up with Captain Marvel, and they shared, with the Nega bands, the going back and forth from like issue 17 or 18 through issue 50. And the way they figure out how to separate the two is genius. But something I want to point out real quick was one of the most powerful things in the book was when Mar-Vell's talking to Mentor, and they're talking about the diagnosis, and he goes, "We on Titan call it the inner decay. You Kree have named it the black end. Earthmen call it cancer." I get goosebumps. I just got them again, just reading those 3 panels. It's just so powerful.
No, it's really good.
We also learn kind of where it came from through an adventure. He's worried about Rick. That's one of the reasons he tells him, because he doesn't think it's happened, but he had to, there's some type of gas that had come out that he had controlled, but the negabands had held it in check for a very long time, or he would have been succumbed to his illness a lot earlier, Joe.
Yeah, no. And then Nitro would go on to murder a lot of kids in Civil War. So
Stanford.
It's just, I guess they just had to up the stakes from that. Like, it's not bad enough you kind of indirectly killed, Captain Marvel. You got to murder a lot of kids now. And for someone who did all of that, he's a very overlooked villain. It's very odd. But yeah, and another thing here too, to show just the cruelty of Marvel writers. All those years, you couldn't hook Rick Jones up with, Black Widow or Miss Marvel or someone. Like, come on.
Have you seen Margot? Or Marlowe? I mean, he did all right in the end.
He in the end, later on. But I mean, like, at this point in the history of the character, it's like, come on.
So speaking of falling low, Joe kind of, he didn't allude to it. We talked about it earlier. This is where we do get the revelation. He's talking to Mentor, and he's like, "I need to go tell Elysius what has happened." We get that wonderful silent page, and what information is being conveyed, Breen, as Joe said, but all of it is portrayed through the reactions on the faces. She's surprised, and you could see that she realizes what's happening, and like the sorrow on her face is just perfectly executed on as far as a 9 panel. Just very emotional stuff there, Breen.
Yeah, I said that no words were needed for that. And then the next conversation where she's explaining to Mar-Vell why Rick reacted the way he did. Mm-hmm. It's kind of the same setup, only with dialogue, and it works again. So for a character that very few people remember, and I'll be honest, myself, I barely remembered her as well. Mm. She really comes off as a really well done character in this story.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's when we kind of start seeing, we have a time jump, and we start seeing all the heroes starting uniting, realizing what's happened to Captain Marvel. They need to do something. I think we've got the Avengers, we've got the Fantastic Four, we got Beast, so the X-Men are represented. We've got the Titans, we got Mentor and Eros, and they're all trying to save him from cancer. And at one point, Joe, they kind of sit there and they realize, this whole time, we've been, stopping villains. We've been doing this and this, but we've been letting this, cancer that's taking lives. We've never addressed it. We could have been fighting this the whole time. And kind of a moment of realization that while we are helping people, there are other ways that we could have been helping as well.
Yeah, no, and it's done in a tasteful way here.
It's not heavy-handed. It's not to make the reader feel bad or even make the heroes look stupid. Yeah. It's just them realizing that they have no time left.
Yeah.
But perhaps they could have done something more.
Yeah, no, that idea that they're there for urgency, and these longer, more prolonged problems are maybe something they could have addressed. But yeah, it's great just seeing all these characters coming together, obviously. But yeah, and just the commiserating. And
this is where we start to see Mar-Vell's kind of more in a bed, and he says he can't put on his costume anymore because it doesn't really fit him anymore. Obviously, he's losing weight. I think we start seeing he's got some contraptions on his face as he's getting oxygen and stuff.
No, you have all that going on, and right before that, with Elysius, he's talking about how he remembers when Adam Warlock died, and that he embraced death, and that he will not do the same. Which again, powerful moment in the book. Like, a lot of times in these stories, especially prior to this, it was always a noble sacrifice, or it was always like, you know, the hero's welcoming death because of the greater good and all that. But he's got, for being a Kree, he's having a more conflicted human kind of reaction to death, kind of being like, I don't want to die. Like, I'm not welcoming this. Like, I'm going to, you know, fight it. And, you know, what happens, but I'm not looking forward to this. This isn't how I want to go. And I think that, again, helps really elevate the story and take it to that next level where this really is literature for an older audience.
So things are starting to get heavy here, Breen. You know, we're on Titan, and essentially all of Earth's heroes are showing up. Some of the other heroes from around the galaxy. I think we see Drax, you know, pre-Dave Bautista-looking Drax. We've also got Moondragon in there, kind of talking to him, interesting conversation. But you know, it's getting, you know, he's bedridden at this point. It's getting pretty rough. We've got some really good lines from The Thing, where, you know, he's that uncle that you would expect to be handling it well in front of everybody. Can crack a joke here and there, try to keep the mood as light as possible. As other characters like Spider-Man are kind of breaking down, he can't really handle it, Breen.
Yeah, and I want to point out before that, because Captain Marvel has his breakdown where he smashes the machinery.
Yes.
And he has the very human reaction where he goes, I never thought it would happen to me. And he goes, and I don't like the idea that life is going to go on without me.
Yes.
It's something that I'm sure most people in that situation have said at some point. Now, to the gathering, that's where I want to point out that at this time, Jim Shooter was the biggest stickler for continuity that this industry's ever seen. This was the one time he allowed it to be tweaked, because there are many people who would not have been in this story given what was going on in the other books. They kind of just, you know, winked that away for the purpose of the story. And I'm glad they did, because 40 years later, you know, who's going to know? So that said, you know, the bit with The Thing, cracking the jokes, and then the moment with Spider-Man, which I think is one of the overlooked by some, but I think one of the most powerful parts of the book, where he can't handle it. He excuses himself. Yeah. The Thing reacts, and then, you know, and then Mar-Vell, who's, you know, I guess using some of the insight he just gained from Elysius, points out to us that people react to death differently. Some barely mark its passing, others are greatly affected by it. Now, I don't know if this was intentional, but it's the Beast that, you know, that like, you know, comforts him in the hallway. They had an adventure a few years earlier that began with a body dropping into the East River. You know, that's the beginning of the story. So they'd actually seen death together. So I think it was kind of, whether it was intentional or not, it was kind of interesting that it was Hank McCoy of all people to kind of, you know, talk him, you know, tell him that it's gonna be all right.
This kind of gets us to this Moondragon Drax portion where they show up. There's a special guest, and, you know, there's like a general from the Skrull army that's shown up there he's like an emissary to say, you know, you're one of our greatest foes ever. And, you know, people are kind of lamenting, like, where are the Kree in all this? We know he's an outcast, but, you know, he is a great warrior for him. We're losing somebody that's really special. The Kree never show up, but even the Skrulls showed up to pay homage and you know, say thank you to him and recognize his contributions, and, you know, what a fierce warrior was, Joe. I thought that was cool.
Oh yeah, no, it all, again, really elevates everything here. It's the kind of send off that I think a lot of people want for characters like this. I mean, it's everything you kind of think of when you imagine like a good send off, and I'm sure a lot of people have mined this particular story for that kind of stuff. And yeah, having you know,
think of Guardians of the Galaxy. What happens at the end when Yondu perishes, and you know, the other Ravagers that had, you know, had basically isolated him for so long, they show up to pay their respect.
Yeah. No, it's a really beautiful moment. This whole thing, and that leads right into, Rick Jones also kind of having
Finally
to
arriving,
lament like that he's been unfair.
Yeah, he shows up right before the Skrull general, and when he breaks down, I think one of the characters that he handled the best in this book was Ben Grimm. Yeah. Because after just right after Spidey, when Rick gets there, he walks out of the room, just closes the door, and goes, "They're going to want to be alone for a while," and that just he just got it. I mean, that's just, and then the general shows up, and of course lets Rick have another one of those, what the F moments. Your enemies give you medals, and your own people, don't show up, and you just get. But I betrayed the Kree. And so I say all this was just so well done.
Yeah.
And at this point, we're getting to the end of the book. Obviously, we know what's going to happen, what the end point is. We're not sure exactly how they're going to get there. He falls into a coma, and then he starts seeing Thanos at this point. I guess he's dreaming about encountering Thanos, returning from his a stone state at this point, Breen, and they have a conversation. Very interesting. They kind of battle it out, and kind of are you scared of death kind of conversation.
Yeah, I think this was, like I said, the last fever dream of a man about to die, confronting his greatest enemy, who is basically, as we find out, is there to kind of. I interpret that as it was Thanos convincing Mar-Vell that death is nothing to be afraid of, face it like a warrior, which he had up until the end, but then it was like he needed to be reminded, because death isn't the end. It's certainly not in Marvel Comics. So they have the battle, and where he's back to full health, at least that's they fight, and then you realize at the end it's inevitable.
We get the line. He takes death by the hand. I think she's holding Thanos' hand. She's holding Captain Mar-Vell's hand. And Thanos says, obviously in his dream, she will lead us on our journey. She will show us this is not the end, only the beginning. Very similar to what we saw in the Black Panther movie, the conversation between T'Challa and Black Widow. Very emotional stuff there. And then we get the scene, the flatline happens. And that's essentially the end of the story. I like that there's no epilogue to this. The end is the death. You see the reactions on the other heroes' faces, and that's the way it should go.
Yeah. No, it's powerful. Jim Starlin, I think, understands pacing really well and what people want and how you should end something, and made it a point to be like, we gotta have this last sort of fight scene coming up, a lot more action. We gotta show Captain Marvel at his height again. I think it adds to the loss to remind the reader one more time about how incredible Captain Marvel is before he passes away.
Yeah, I think it would have been lessened had there been any dialogue after he's gone. I thought that was a perfect ending.
Yeah.
Certainly would have been pretty heavy stuff, Breen. I can imagine this is the right way to do a story like this, the right vehicle to put it out in there. And you look back on it, it's timeless because it's executed so perfectly. It's a character that a lot of people love. They have a lot of feelings for. And if you're going to say goodbye, you want to say goodbye the right way. And it felt like an homage to the character and a wonderful story in Marvel Comics history.
Yeah.
It's interesting that at the time of this story, Marvel was kind of moving away from the whole cosmic ideas that had been so prevalent throughout the 70s. If you just look at it as an end, because if you read this now, you realize how many Thanos stories have been done since then. But at the time, Thanos had been dead for 4 or 5 years. He was still dead, which was an eternity in comics. But the story was really powerful, and it was kind of like the last send off at the time, being Captain Marvel, and it just, like I said, it seems so hard to believe now, given, like I said, how much how many of these characters have been around and done to death in some cases and beyond. It's a credit to Marvel that they never brought him back. I mean, they've teased it. They've had a Skrull impersonate him in a miniseries around Civil War time, but they've never brought him back. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a daughter.
Mm-hmm. So what are your final thoughts on this one, Joe? I was very impressed. I'm glad we read this one. I'm glad Eric said, hold up, fellas. You're going to wait for me to review this one. I want to talk about this with you.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a story that does everything you want it to do. And it's the kind of story, like, if you're telling a really good story, it doesn't matter if you spoil the ending in the title. And I think this does a fantastic job in that same kind of... It's almost like the other side of the coin of, or the opposite of a Death of Gwen Stacy, where this is a whole story building up to that inevitable moment, whereas the Death of Gwen Stacy is a shocker out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And the fact that these are probably easily two of the best examples of, you know, deaths in comics. Sorry for any Marvel comics, at least, and sorry for you big Gene DeWolf fans out there. But these two in particular, I think, really hit it just right in like exact opposite ways. And I'm glad we've covered both of those. Absolutely.
So really enjoyed this, and obviously this is like a highest recommendation. If you haven't read this, go get yourself a copy and do yourself a favor and read it. I think you're going to enjoy it. You don't need another character to really appreciate the craftsmanship and the story behind it, because they do catch you up on the history of the character. Obviously, next week we'll be doing a DC Comics review. Until then, thank you very much. Certainly, thank you very much to Joe and Eric for joining me and talking about this. These are definitely my favorite segments to do every single week.